Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, High Assurance for Today's World. My name is Carol Vidaro, and I'm the Senior Marketing Communications Manager for Software House at Enrollment. In this webinar, we'll take a look at how the access control market is moving towards PKI-based high assurance authentication and what solutions are available today. The session includes discussions on high assurance for U.S. government applications as well as commercial projects. Our panelists today are John Cassis and Matt Shannon. Both are Senior Product Managers for Biometrics High Assurance Security Solutions. Just a couple of things before we begin. The phones are muted to prevent any background noise. The webinar is being recorded, and a link will be sent to all attendees after the after the webinar, along with the PowerPoint. And we'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to add a question in the question box to the right of your screen. So now I'm going to turn the webinar over to Matt Shannon.
Thank you, Carol. I appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. I appreciate you joining today. Just one quick change to what Carol said. If you have questions, feel free to ask them in the midst of the presentation. If there's anything you'd like to know, Carol will be monitoring what they come up, and we'll try to answer them in real time. You have our contact information here and at the end. So if you'd like to reach out, or if you have questions afterwards or would like a deeper discussion, by all means, don't hesitate to contact us. As Carol mentioned, our topic today is to talk about high assurance in today's world and how it fits in various places. Often people will hear of high assurance and think government PKI FIPS 201, but really before we started to talk about the solution itself, we wanted to talk about high assurance in a larger generic way. What is high assurance? What questions does it ask? What are all the possible answers you might get from those questions? And who really cares about the answers in general? If these are the answers we receive, what are the relevant things that we need to be able to do with what we get? We will then, of course, speak specifically about FICAM and FIPS 201 as an implementation of this definition of high assurance that we've come up with. We'll talk about some of the hardware that we've recently released in the reader side, some new functionality that we're calling universal biometric enrollment, which has a role in high assurance ultimately. For those of you who are in the federal area, I think Stafford Mahfouz would hang me up by my toenails if I didn't take a moment and speak publicly of where we are with the GSA in our APL testing. And should there be any questions that we haven't answered by that point, we'll pick them up there. So moving into it, what is high assurance? For anyone who is a Douglas Adams fan, I think part of what we're faced here is not so much a lack of understanding of the answer, but really not fully understanding what the question is. A lot of you know, as I've said, about FICAM and FIPS 201. For this, we'll call that a technology set, an instance, a version of high assurance. It's a good answer, but it's not the question itself. And we will spend the second half of this presentation talking about FICAM in particular. So what is a broader vision of high assurance in general? We want to talk about something that came to me really from what my dad would say quite often. Use the right tool for the right job at the right time. High assurance kind of plays into that. You want to be able to dynamically, at a point in time, validate, ask a question, ask the right question at the right time to get the answer you need in a temporal context at a moment, what is important to you in that moment. High assurance then is really about confidence. Confidence in your system, confidence in the answers you're getting, confidence in the people that you're dealing with. And secondly, about your relationship with the person you're dealing with at that moment in that point of time. So high assurance is about people and it's about confidence. If those are the things that we broadly look at of what we need for high assurance, the question becomes, what would you want to know about that person in a perfect world prior to giving them access to the things you're charged with protecting? So what are the questions? Douglas Adams said it's 42. Well, okay, so we got to come up with a question that we understand. The first piece is this actually the person I think it is? They've made a claim of being someone. I need to evaluate whether or not I agree. And then the other part becomes, what is my belief, my confidence in this person's reputation at this moment in time? Reputation, okay, well, how do you measure reputation in an access control system? Reputation really becomes a bucket for a number of different pieces that have to do with the level of trust you want to give someone. In a high assurance perspective, many of you will be familiar with trust anchors. That's the kind of piece. But you want to know who it is, what you think of them, what you know of their intent. Okay, I now have some answers as to, or some questions and some answers from that about the person. But everybody has an opinion and everybody has a bias. So what is it that's currently coloring my understanding of what I've heard of who the person is, and what I know of their reputation? What is your security state? Oh, well, what does that mean? Well, think as a person. What do you do when someone comes to your front door? At that point in time, what is your organization's state of mind? What emotions are you thinking about? What's going on in the neighborhood? What's going on around you? Are you as a person, are you as an organization happy? Everything's cool, relaxed, we have no problems, anxious, there could be a problem coming, cautious, I have a problem? These are things that are going to change your decision. Even though the person may be the same, your state will change the answer that you give. You may want to know more, may want to get more from them before you let them in. The other piece is risk management. Everything is risk management. Risk management, as I often put it, is the Mona Lisa problem. If I have the real Mona Lisa in a room, I really care about locking the door. If I have a $10 lithograph of the thing, I'm a little bit less concerned. If these are the answers that we seek, they're basic questions about people and relationships. And that question is universal for anyone who is concerned about access control. But how high assurance is implemented is different from individual organization to individual organization. We know for the government, FICAM and FIPS 201 is a hard defined spec with a testing regimen, and that is what that area needs. High assurance for a gym is, do you have your card and your biometric? For financial institutions, for healthcare, there are different sets of high assurance. And even though you have a set of definitions, the context and the time change what you may want. This vision, this intersection of who, of reputation, and of what your state is what we have used in trying to craft the solutions that we have. So, a simplistic view of the way things have been. The approaches that are in the market from beginning of time are good. They fit at the time in which they were created, but they're fractured or not unified, and they're stovepiped. They're built in certain ways that while they may answer a lot of these questions, they work one way, or they're very point-based or unidimensional, not much to it. Traditionally, we will give a person a credential, a thing, and that's good. But that thing really has very little tie to the person or to time. It has an issue date, has an expiration date. My partner John could have it, I could have it. It's just, is the card there? All the pitfalls are quite known for this: lost, stolen, given to someone else, gets cloned. It goes on and on about the thing. When you unlock that door, when you just have a simple token or even a moderately secure token, what you've verified is that the thing is there, but you've not answered the question about, well, what do I think of the person? Though everyone is muted, I hear many of you saying, well, wait a minute, what about biometrics? What about pins? We've been through this before. There's something you have, there's something you know, there's something you are. That makes the situation better, but it still starts to leave out the question of reputation and time context. I now know that that card is with the person, and I'm pretty certain that that card is theirs, but I don't know what has happened with that person or their organization or my stance from the time that I've issued the card to the time today. So what then is the way it could be, or really in reality, the way it is becoming? What are the what ifs? As I've mentioned, a lot of the solutions have been point-based, flat, singular, unidimensional. If we're going to start talking about high assurance in a human way with multiple pieces of somewhat subjective context of time and reputation and who they are, then we need a solution that is dimensional, multiple facets, matrixed, modular, open. Open. We don't have all the answers. We don't have all the hardware. We need to support various different pieces. Modular. We're going to have pieces that need to snap in and snap out. Matrix. There are going to be times where I want to use things in various combinations based on various types of context or situations, security situations that I'm in. This gives you not just I have a thing or I have a couple of things that tie together, but it gives you breadth and depth. More than one thing mixed and matched based on the person and your context. Oh, okay, I've got lots of pieces. How do I make all of this work? We need to bring in a portion that is a workflow, an automation, a process, something that helps you say, in this moment, if I tell you this, then that. And in that moment, change what it is that you're going to ask of the person before you grant them access. Dynamically based, security-based security levels. What are we going to use for this? Today, a lot of the pieces are traditional. They've been around. Cards, readers, cameras, tokens, key fobs, they go with the person. But multiple and dynamic sensors in a broadest sense can be anything. We can use phones, we can use tokens, we can use relationships of other devices near other devices. And the inputs can be as equally varied. Readers, cameras, mobile devices, the things that you use to read things can also be used to verify things. And you need a way to mix and match these together. That gives me the way to say it's the person, and I'm pretty sure it's them, but what about the reputation piece? An ability to collect information from reputable people, things that you trust, external. What is the reputation? Well, reputation is what others think of you. So you need the ability to bring that external information in. In FICAM, we reference this or think of it as the ID server, the path validation and discovery engine, where you query the chain. Do I still trust the card? Do I still trust the certificates that have made up that card? In other areas, it could be like things that visitor management do, where is this person on a watch list? Are they wanted? Are, God forbid, are they a sexual predator that we need to watch out for? Are they on a travel ban? There are other sources that you can bring in dynamically to decide what you want to do. All of these capabilities in a framework that you can change can answer the question in context of, is this who we care about? Is this Matt? Is he still reputable? And based on what I'm doing right now, do I want to let him in? Okay, lots of words. This isn't meant to be a technical diagram as much as a let's draw a picture to kind of put it all together. On your left, the orange, blue, and purple are the internals to a degree of Secure. You have an access control system. We're going to add to that something that I call the trust bus, the orange piece at the top, where I have the ability to snap in an external piece that will give me external, separate from the access control system, internal to the solution, information about the person, that reputation piece, the ID server, the PD val engine, if you would, in high assurance or in FICAM. I want to be able to, in the blue, manage the identity, manage how that information comes in, and to give that information to various panels. Then in the green, I want to have a way to actually do the queries. Where's my state? In this state, I want a card and a picture, that type of thing. And it all has to snap into the bottom, the basis of Secure, where all of the administration, logging, and decision-making is done. Have a singular instance with a trust bus inside of Secure today that's used for high assurance. This is part of the architecture that we use. And then you can start to scale this out to larger pieces. You have one Secure system in a mass SaaS environment, talking to many panels, sending the identities and questions that need to be asked to the panel to the auth module that runs on the panel, speaking to multiple readers, not just our own, to bring together the information to answer the question in context. That's the type of vision that we have when we think of high assurance that we have to add. So how does this actually get implemented? The largest, hardest tested version of high assurance is FICAM and FIPS 201. We have that solution, and to step you through some of the particulars of that, I'm going to pass the presentation over to my business partner, John Cassis, unless there are any questions at the moment. Carol, I don't see any in, but are there?
There are no questions at this time.
All right, John, I'll pass this to you.
All right, well, thank you. Again, as well, I appreciate everybody's time and attention. And you kind of noticed that was a bit of a different approach to starting a conversation about technology and high assurance and FIPS 201. But we felt that that sort of philosophical layer, that intro, was important. And it's important because we're talking about high assurance, not just in that one spectrum of the space, in the government space. When we started this, when Asymmetric started this back in 2010, we always believed that this solution was bigger than the government space, and the commercial space was the next logical area for us to venture into. And while focusing on the FICAM, the government space, it's simple, and you can just simply say, tick a box, yes, this is high assurance, yes, this meets the FIPS 201 requirement. When you get into the commercial space, now it becomes a bit more of why and how and what can we implement, given, as Matt mentioned, our security scenario that we're dealing with. And so that's why it's important that we start to understand the why. And as we get into the technology and how we implemented it into Secure and the iStar panel, it starts to become clearer. It isn't just about ticking a box. It's really about implementing the true functionality of high assurance, the why and the who and the identity of the individual. That's going to really, really matter when we move into that commercial space. And how it's implemented, its scalability, its flexibility, all of those things become very important when we get into that particular space. And so now, with a little bit more of a focus on the technology side of it, we're going to dive into how this has been implemented into the solution. So I think we've covered a lot of these already. So we'll go ahead and go on to the next slide. And this is really now helping us to appreciate what is just the fundamental difference between anything asymmetric. So MyFair, iClass, COS, DesFire, whatever it is. When you think about a card technology up until this point, you think about its interaction with the reader, because in reality, every level and every bit of security, whether it's biometric, asymmetric keys, whatever it is you're doing, it was always happening between the card and the reader. And now when we look at high assurance, that's a much different answer, because when we look, go ahead, Matt, and click one time in a clone card, for instance, right? In the past, if you took a MyFair card and cloned it, there was no way for that to be discovered. But now when we look at it from a high assurance standpoint, and again, we're going to stay at a 50,000-foot view here, but you actually see where that card is actually identified and those failures can occur, because we're not just checking it at the card, we're not just checking it at the reader, we're also doing that validation back at the panel. Now let's move on to the next scenario. Somebody gets fired. Well, again, because of the identity of the individual being tied into whatever back-end office solution you have, as well as the certificates that have been given to it, that card is removed from multiple elements of your access environment. So The certificates are no longer valid, which means that the card to the reader to the panel, all of those elements no longer are valid. So in multiple places, that kind of event is captured. What about a no trust scenario? So you think about this standpoint. I'm Bank of America, and I have multiple vendors that use my facility. I could, at one stroke of a pen or one stroke of a click, be able to remove access to that entire vendor's access, because the certificate authority that I trusted to allow 1,000 individuals into my facility, I could remove the trust to their certificate authority, thus removing all of those, even if it had nothing to do with the access control system. And that's really an important element when we start looking at these large enterprise systems. So we're connecting at that level. Again, what if I've lost or the card was stolen from me? Well, what's the scenario in that? Go ahead, Matt, click on the next one, please. So again, because that particular card has been lost, I can revoke just that particular certificate. And so you see all of the elements of this high assurance solution are enacted, and that card is no longer valid. Well, what if I were to go in and just modify the card number or modify the biometrics, take Matt's biometrics out and put my biometrics in? Again, because of the way that this system is a holistic approach and everything is tied together to the identity, to the credential, to the access control system, to the certificates that were put onto that card, we can detect and deny access to a card that has just been modified by one bit of information. And then we have the standard invalid use, right? Now, the interesting thing here is, in the past, you think about biometrics could address a situation like that, right? When we'll get a little bit more into the technology side of it, but because all of the authentication that we're talking about is happening back at the panel itself, the biometric authentication is happening in the panel as well. So no longer are you dependent on the reader and the card and the vulnerability that it has because of its location. We've moved that now into the panel, and we've secured the communication between the reader and the panel with secure OSDP. So we've greatly enhanced what was just otherwise a typical solution, but by thinking about it in a more holistic approach and saying, what would be the best way, if we had no concerns about how to implement it, what would be the best way to do it? This approach, when we look at high assurance, especially again, as we move this into the enterprise or the commercial application, it just starts to answer a lot of questions that a lot of enterprises have been asking for, but there hasn't been anything on the market. So moving what we've implemented in high assurance into that space, from the government to the commercial, starts to make a tremendous amount of sense. Okay, Matt, if you wouldn't mind, the next slide, please. Yeah, there you go. Now, in doing this, it's obviously important that we need this to work throughout the hardware architecture, right? And so in saying this, I'm going to say it, and it's going to sound like it was something simple, but it was a massive undertaking to take the authentication module that we originally had built for a standalone device and put that into not just one of the iStar architectures, but all of them. And when you look at the iStar Ultra, for instance, and then compare it to the Ultra LT or the product that's about ready to be released, the Edge 2, all of those have that authentication module built into them. So you buy a panel today, even if you're going to use it in a strictly commercial space, it has that high assurance authentication module built in, ready to go, ready to be turned on and used. And the way in which that's licensed, it's licensed at the Secure 9000. So again, a tremendous amount of flexibility there. So no extra hardware, no extra wiring, no limitations, because this is now an inherent piece of that solution. Let's go ahead, Matt, and we'll go on to the next slide. And it didn't obviously stop at the hardware, right? So the other side of it is if you asked anybody previously, hey, if you could do something different about our FIPS 201 approach, what would it be? Well, it would be fully integrating it, right? So that's what we've done over the course since the acquisition till now, and you'll start to see some of the fruits of that labor, because there was quite a bit of work to be done there. We've now built, for instance, into the Secure 9000, the enrollment piece, the application. So put your card into a smart card reader, open up the personnel tab, and you can read that information directly into Secure. And then that information is sent out to, as Matt mentioned before, our ID server for the validation piece of it. And then the validation engine is continuously checking and looking for that validation to make sure that nothing has changed about that individual. And you can set that interval to whatever it is that you want. The latest version, the 2.8 solution, Secure 9000 2.8, now has full mass SAS integration, because again, all of the information now resides inside that Secure database, and it's moved out of the database to the panels as necessary. Let's go ahead and go on to the next slide there, Matt. And then what about the control side of it, right? What if I want to be able to turn readers on and off, and features, as Matt said, the right tool, the right time? That's what's now built in here. You can create different scenes or different authentication approaches for normal and secure. And then within the software, you can control that. Anywhere you could change from card to PIN or enable PIN functionality, whatever that was, or whatever that case is, no matter where you are in the Secure 9000 software, you now have the ability to control what kind of authentication you want to function for an individual reader at an individual time. It can be manual, it could be scheduled, it could be event driven. That is really all up to you and how you want to implement the solution. And again, this is licensed on a per reader basis. So you might have 400 readers in your facility, and they might be, across obviously multiple panels, because Secure and iStar Ultra can handle up to 16 readers. You now turn on which readers you want. It isn't hardware dependent, it's software dependent. So maybe you have the perimeter that you want to enable this on. So it doesn't matter what panel they're on. As soon as you configure it, if you have 100 readers licensed, you configure one reader, you lose one of those readers. And it's not a hardware dependent solution. So again, as we move into the commercial space, this becomes even that more necessary, because of obviously the differing scenarios from a commercial environment. All right, Matt, if you don't mind, let's take a look at the transaction side of it. Now, again, you need to be able to go and post-mortem see what happened and why it happened and when it happened. And so both in the alarm screen as well as in the log file, you see that not only do I see an event taking place, but you see what kind of authentication happened and why it either passed or failed. But even you see that yellow one there at 70804, you can see that I changed the security setting from one level to another and who it was. And so throughout the entire product, we really did focus from both hardware and software, making sure that the solution was just as you would imagine it be, that, hey, this is a Secure 9000 that now has the ability to do high assurance in whatever configuration it is that you're looking for. Okay, Matt, if you don't mind, next slide, please. Now, the second side of this is, and Matt had mentioned this before, is, we do have good solutions, but you know what, we probably don't build the right solution for every particular environment out there. So being open and having the ability to support third-party readers is clearly an important focus for us. And it's always been, obviously, in the Secure 9000, being able to use third-party readers. So while we have our readers, the Cheetah SE, and the Rhino, we also work currently with INID, Wavelengths, Aptique, Schlage, as well. I believe Veric will be coming on here shortly as well. And that list will continue to grow, because it's simply using the OSDP protocol and being able to do that high assurance, or being able to do the authentication commands within that protocol. Next slide, please, Matt. Now, this has always been kind of an interesting thing. It's a little bit of the chicken and the egg when you're going from one approach to another. You've got a MyFair card, for instance, with old hardware. Well, what do I change out first and how does that work, right? Well, again, here you have a lot of flexibility. We have solutions that allow us to migrate in a controlled way. So you could put your iStar panels in right now, use your existing readers, or even put in new readers, but put them in the MyFair mode, and then that would allow you to continue to migrate that card and that capability along the way. So the reverse scenario is you could put the new cards in, and of course at that point you're at least going to have to put new readers in, but because our hardware supports both RM and OSDP, you could actually work your way backwards, and you could put the cards in first and then move your hardware forward. And again, as I mentioned before, the panels come with it enabled. The Secure 9000 with 2.7 or 2.8, depending on what flavor you're looking at, it has it built in. So you can deploy those solutions first, then later on allow you to turn on and integrate the high assurance elements. All right, Matt, next slide. Let me just stop there for a minute. Does anybody have any questions? Carol, any questions come in so far?
No questions.
Okay, excellent. All right, so let's go ahead on to the next slide here. So we're just going to talk a little bit about the hardware for a moment, the reader solutions. So we have the Cheetah Bio, which is actually launching in April, and we actually already have this product built and in stock and in inventory. Just with the current sort of status of the world, we delayed the launch of it a little bit. But this allows you an option, and you see here both the Cheetah and the Cheetah, the Cheetah SE and the Cheetah SE Bio. The idea here is we took that new reader and we added on the biometric capability. So Civ, PIV, PIV-I, iClass, MyFair, DesFire, and pin and finger when we're talking about universal biometric enrollment, which Matt will get into a little bit more. But these readers both support RM and OSDP secure channel. So if we go to the next slide, we'll get a little bit more into the details of the reader. So again, because the biometric version of this was derived from the Cheetah SE, these elements of support are across both platforms. And the idea here was a lower cost, smaller footprint supporting both RF only as well as RF and contact. We still allow you to support the supervised inputs, outputs, tamper on the reader, indoor and outdoor versions. And again, when you look at the panel capabilities, because we support both RM protocol as well as OSDP, secure channel, and even non-secure channel, the raft of panels that we can connect these to increases substantially. And that's the concept there. You could actually replace your readers today on older hardware that supports RN 485 communication. And then later on in the future, when you, for instance, change out some other elements of your solution, you can configure and turn on. So it allows you to easily migrate from one architecture to a more updated one that gives you a lot more future-proof capabilities in the solution. All right, Matt, I think that goes back to you now, does it not?
It does. It does. I appreciate it. Thank you, John. So as John had reviewed, a lot of the grand thoughts around what high assurance is and how it relates to people were implemented by Asymmetrics, and over the past couple of iterations, Software House has internalized all of it. Everything that we did separately is now part and parcel of Secure, because our belief is that the right high assurance for the end user isn't something that's optional. It is something that needs to be in the product. And so you can see where the idea is now real in software. But there are a couple of things that still need to be done. One of the first ones that I'll talk about is what we call universal biometric enrollment. And it's a simple idea to begin with, but it is core to expanding our capability in high assurance. So currently in Secure, because of the way the software was built and the thought process at the time, each biometric experience is separate and external. That's the way we designed the interface at the time. I'll use Iris as the example. You have Secure. If you have the Iris ID piece, you have an Iris ID server. The enrollment is outside of Secure most of the time. The storage of the template, the authentication is separate and external, and the answer is given to Secure. The same is true of biometric implementations and some facial recognition implementations within Secure. The concept of UBE, Universal Biometric Enrollment, is to unify that, to not have an external experience, to not have external storage, to make a biometric a core key feature of Secure in the same way that we've already gone and done high assurance. So the first implementation of UBE in Secure will be fingerprint, something that Asymmetric had in the toolkit, simple for us to do, works with this infrastructure of various modular pieces where we can have a biometric, we can have a card, we can have a PIN, we can in workflow dynamically change what we're going to use of that, and we can simplify the user experience for enrollment and use and the storage of the biometric. It was a very easy way to start with universal biometric enrollment. But the idea for it is we will take the other modalities of biometrics and apply the same methodology, where UBE is the interface in the experience, and the importance of the biometric data and the use of that data is core to Secure. If any of you have been involved with biometrics for years, you may remember back in the early to mid 2000s, there was the concept of Bio API for biometrics. It's evolved to become different things, but that concept of an interface that unifies the experience and the data. It's a nice thing to have. It is a good experience. Why am I going on about it? Well, it's because of the infrastructure that we're building in UBE and what UBE becomes down the line in future releases. We go from focusing on the biometric to universal enrollment. We mentioned before that in high assurance, you need multiple dimensions, multiple sensors, matrixed and changed with modular components for things that are not ours. Universal enrollment becomes that ability to bring all sorts of ways to query or validate someone into Secure and into the high assurance capability. We will abstract, we will extract the information from each sensor, cameras, phones, facial, iris, into an internal infrastructure where you can use the automation, the workflow to create what it is that you want to do in a scenario to ask someone. It is our foundation for multiple dynamic sensors. We started with, we want to let you craft the right question at the right time to get the right answer. UBE starts with a simple premise, but the framework that we're building will be able to handle would like it to, just about anything. This is down the line, not immediate release, but this is the concept and the vision that we have to round out our ability to answer the question uniquely and in a temporal context in that time. So the last thing here that we'd like to go through, and the thing that I like I said, I think Stafford would kill me if I didn't do, is to tell you where, for the government, this high assurance solution is in testing. FICAM is a spec standard based on NIST FIPS 201 and all the things that FIPS 201 calls out by reference. There's the testing protocol that is done by GSA and their lab. The FRTC 1.33 is the current testing piece. So I want to give you an update on that. Most importantly, this does not reflect the official position of GSA, the lab, or the contractor CertiPath. This is my talking to you openly and transparently. It is not to say that GSA has stamped this for the pieces that we're going through. So I feel it fair to tell you, I'm telling you where we are because I want you to know this isn't coming from GSA. So the the solution, Secure 27 SP5, with the high assurance that we've talked about already, our readers, INID, Verdit, and Aptique readers have been submitted and have gone through the first round of testing. The lab has returned to us the initial results. There are 3 areas of questions: policies, OCSP, and a nuance of a card that doesn't have biometrics. We're reviewing those. We know what's going on with policies. We certainly know what we're going to do about the biometric piece. OCSP, we're still exploring internally. We're going to submit our questions back to them, and the process will continue. The next steps in this process, for anyone going through this process, are to have the discussions about the findings, to talk about possible changes in what we will do, changes in, oh, we see it differently, okay, we're fine with your answer, or fixes that we'll do in the solution. They'll retest these things, write their report, review it internally, and then issue the letter. This is their normal process. We're kind of going down the line. If I were asked, is that a lot? Is that a little? It's very much exactly the same things, except for the OS, the policy and the FICAM card piece were exactly what we went through with the phase 1 piece of it. Everyone reads the spec a little bit differently. So this is nothing to be concerned about or a big problem, exactly where we were before. I don't have a timeline, but this is the most important thing that we do in trying to get this done. It has been a long time in coming. So when I'm not doing this presentation, I'm doing that. In the queue is Secure 2.8 with SP1, the version of H8 that goes with that, and it will be tested at the same time probably as we are also updating Secure with the HID PAM solution. So while we have a high assurance that the company owns, we certainly remain committed to our customers that use other high assurance solutions with Secure 9000. That, I believe, brings us to the very, very end. I will pause to ask Carol or John, are there any other questions that I have not seen? Or is there anyone who would like to ask a question at this time?
There are 4 questions.
Wow.
With respect to SCP, what versions are supported? Are there plans to support SCP 11 or 1.1?
I'm going to guess that this is a Google question. And the answer is we will support anything that we need to in that regard. And I will get you the specific version of SCP to make sure I don't cross my answers. So let me put a thumbtack in that one for now.
Does the Cheetah Bio do on-chip biometric verification, or is it done elsewhere?
John, I'll let you take that.
Yeah, so it depends on the implementation, right? So you say on chip, so I'm assuming that what you're talking about is on the card. And so there's 3 different places that you can do matching, right? You can do it on the card, you could do it in the reader, or you can do it back at the panel. Currently, we support both at the panel and at the reader, depending on the implementation. We have not implemented on chip to date, simply because, you know, from our standpoint, it just reduces the horsepower. And when I know there's privacy issues and concerns and things like that. But, you know, when you look at it strictly from a security standpoint, pushing it back to the panel is the best answer. We've done some proof of concepts where we can do it on the card or on the chip. And, you know, we're open to implementing that should there be a justifiable or a commercial opportunity for us to justify the expense, to actually bring from proof of concept to implementation.
When migrating from older cards to newer cards, you mentioned that we can install new readers enabled with MyFair. Is there a way to push a configuration update remotely to the reader when the new cards are available?
Yes, there is. So currently, the way that would work, and again, we're talking about Asymmetric readers at the moment. Every other reader does things differently. But we create a configuration file. Now, it does require that the reader would, at this point in time, have an Ethernet connection, but you could push out to multiple readers over an Ethernet connection the configuration to change it from MyFair to FICAM or whatever, or high assurance, whatever the case may be. We're looking to be able to allow that as well in a future release to push that out over OSDP as well.
Will there be any new features for high assurance solutions in the next gen panels, iStar Edge G2 and iStar Ultra G2?
So high assurance will be available in the panels as it stands today. Any new features would be in lockstep with everything, so there won't be specific new features for new panels. I'm not sure if that answers that question or not.
Well, let me, I think one of the things, Matt, is when we built the authentication module into the panels, and so all of the panels, whether it's Edge or iStar Ultra, we did it with the mindset that it would have an architecture that, or a framework that would allow us to expand it. So for instance, UBE is one of those things, right? So the ability to, in an implementation where you don't even have a card, you're not concerned about doing high assurance, but you want to be able to do biometric at the panel. So pin and finger, even other card technologies that don't support fingerprints on cards, we'll be able to support that as we launch UBE. And just one point of just clarification is we have spent the better part of 4 years, the last 4 years, taking the functionality and embedding it directly into the Secure 9000. In a lot of ways, it doesn't really show that, right? Other than the fact that, hey, I can do something inside of the software that I used to have to use other software to do, but it wasn't necessarily net new, right? But now our focus is, what is it that we can use that framework for as we go forward? So this is a lot more fun focused efforts, right? Actually being able to innovate again. And that's where our focus is. So if any of you have projects or opportunities where you can see, hey, there's a bit or a piece of that framework that makes sense in doing it this way or that way, that's what we're interested in hearing as well.
There was much discussion about allowing the proper person through the door at the proper time. Most of the discussion was based on card user, etc. Is there any intent to implement back-end attributes that may be stored on the card in the future?
Back-end, I'm not sure I answered. I thought the question was going to go a different direction. I'm not sure I understand the question.
I think what they might be talking about is right now the access event. So there's two events, right? There's the card authentication piece, and then there's the authorization piece, right? Right. So I think what they're saying is, hey, any concept of that authorization piece being put on the card, so that maybe down the road, right? And there definitely is that mindset and that focus as we start to look to cloud implementations and things of that nature. That starts to make a tremendous amount of sense, because you can validate the credential and the authenticity of the credential, the identity, and everything we talked about. But maybe now having sitting out there things that aren't panels and door controllers that aren't overly intelligent, like we know access control historically to be. But yeah, this really does start to open the door to those kinds of architectures for sure.
Absolutely.
And we are looking at that.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I would say some of the modular snap-in bus, so common, thoughts that we've had are towards that end of being able to move various pieces of the decision process to unexpected areas. So yes,
and that was
please let us know if that answers the question.
Yeah, and historically, that's always been the weak link, right? Can we put it onto the card? But how do I trust the card? It's using a symmetric key. You break one key and you broke the entire thing. These card technologies, the level of authentication, the assurance that we now have about the card, the credential, and the identity, or the user, the credential and the identity, now allows us to securely distribute those kinds of things. So yeah, no, it's a very good question, and kind of the direction that we're seeing as well.
Very much so.
Is there any movement on impending derived credentials?
Yes. Go ahead, Matt. Yeah, go ahead.
Go after you.
So very much so. And when you're dealing with the government space, you're somewhat pigeonholed and and put in a box, right? But as we move to the commercial side of it, these things become much more accessible and much more desired. Have the strength of a PKI certificate-based authentication, but do I really need that piece of plastic anymore? And so the answer is yes. You know, it's on our roadmap. It's certainly on our radar. Timelines are yet to be determined, because right now, you know, once you start talking to one of these organizations and these entities about high assurance, you know, quickly the discussion goes into these directions. So they're the kinds of things that could fast track what we would otherwise maybe just take a little bit longer to get to. But a big commercial opportunity certainly does help you get there faster.
And one last question. Are you aware of any government group issuing credentials that allow biometric validation on the chip?
Hard card validation? No, I am not.
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly, again, proof of concepts in the past, yes, but as far as FIPS 201 cards are concerned, I haven't run into anybody that has implemented that yet. I'm trying to think of the, it's all escaping me right now, but we did do a proof of concept where we did more of the validation on the card because of a commercial entity's interest in direction. But it's the newer Obither cards, but the acronym is escaping me at the moment.
VCI?
Sorry?
VCI?
VCI, Virtual Card Interface. Yes, thank you. Yes. So that's starting to push that out there to be able to authenticate the card and be able to challenge the card, and the card be able to handle the response before we open up a channel of communication. So it's kind of, I think we're there. We're in the infancy stages of it and initial steps, but nothing full scale deployment that I've seen yet.
And that seems to be it for questions.
Okay. Well, on behalf of Carol and John, Greg, Stafford, we really appreciate you taking time to be with us today. I've often told people time is the one thing you can't get back. So it means a lot to us that you've taken time from your day to be with us. If you have any other questions that you'd like to ask, please let us know. We'll get in touch with you. And all of these presentation materials will be available to you shortly after the webinar closes. Unless there be anything else, thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.